I don't think I can tonight. I'm just catching up on some stuff.
Some people don't open them, but the people who do, come back and complain.
I wish Nikki Freeman loved me more than anyone in the fucking world. What are you doing?
Come on.
What the fuck? Nikki, stop!
Where am I?
Bear sits in a quiet coffee shop and practices confessing his deep feelings to a very patient barista, while his close friend Ian watches the awkward display from across the room. Ian soon interrupts the practice session and tells Bear that he needs to be much more confident if he truly wants to win over the actual girl he loves. This girl is named Nikki, and Ian suggests playfully calling her by the silly nickname Freaky Nikki to lighten the mood. Bear immediately rejects this specific idea because he knows for a fact that she absolutely hates that name. But Ian still pushes him to invite her out for drinks tonight. Bear prefers to wait for an upcoming trivia night because it feels like a familiar environment with far less pressure, but Ian loudly tells him to stop making excuses and take action, feeling a bit more hopeful about his chances. Bear heads back to his apartment only to discover a completely heartbreaking scene waiting for him. His beloved pet cat has tragically died on the kitchen floor after accidentally getting into his spilled medication. He quietly cleans up the terrible mess all alone in his empty apartment. Later that evening, Nikki surprisingly calls him to apologize for being distant all day, and warmly asks if he is still planning to attend trivia night because she has something important to discuss with him. Bear initially hesitates and politely declines the invitation, but he eventually changes his mind and decides to go anyway. On his way to the event, he stops at a small local store to buy a pretty necklace as a gift for her. While browsing the shelves, he notices a strange little item called a wish willow. The store owner warns him that these are magical collectibles and that buyers almost always end up deeply regretting their purchases. Bear completely dismisses the serious warning and jokes that those people probably just got exactly what they wanted and did not know how to handle the reality of it. The shopkeeper remains completely serious as Bear purchases the mysterious object and heads back out into the night. He makes his way to trivia night with the wish willow resting in his pocket, completely unaware of the dark path he is about to walk down. Ian is already waiting at the venue and excitedly encourages Bear to finally make his bold move and tell Nikki how he truly feels. When the night finally ends, Nikki mentions that she is feeling tired, so Bear offers to walk her back to her house. As they stroll through the quiet streets, she starts to open up and confesses that she desperately needs a major change in her life. She tells Bear that he is the only person she trusts enough to share these dark feelings with. But his mind is entirely somewhere else as he struggles with his own hidden emotions. They reach her front door and she casually drops a massive bombshell by revealing that she has been harboring a secret crush on another guy for quite some time. The entire mood between them shifts immediately as Bear feels his heart sink straight into his chest. He frantically calls out to her, trying to finally speak his mind, but the words simply refuse to leave his mouth. Nikki begins to walk away in frustration and Bear panics, blurting out the nickname Freaky Nikki in a desperate attempt to get her attention. She stops dead in her tracks and turns around to firmly warn him never to call her that name again. She then looks him directly in the eyes and asks point blank if he has romantic feelings for her. Bear freezes completely and stands there in utter silence, unable to give her an honest answer. Frustrated and exhausted, Nikki turns back around and goes inside her house, leaving him all alone in the dark. Bear retreats to his car and sits there reflecting on how he just completely ruined his chances with the girl of his dreams. His eyes suddenly fall upon the strange wish willow he bought earlier, which is now resting quietly on his passenger seat. Desperate for a second chance, he picks up the wooden object and snaps it in half while wishing with all his heart that Nikki would like him more than anything else in the world. At first, absolutely nothing happens, and he feels incredibly foolish for trying. He looks up toward the house and suddenly sees Nikki standing perfectly still in the front yard, staring right at him through the creepy darkness. She slowly approaches the car and asks him to come inside for a moment. As they step into her house, she briefly seems to realize that she is acting completely out of character. But that sudden flash of clarity vanishes just as quickly as it appeared. She unexpectedly changes her mind and insists on following Bear back to his own apartment instead. He tries to gently tell her that she does not need to come with him, but she instantly breaks down into heavy tears. She claims that her father is actively dying and that she simply cannot bear the terrible thought of being alone tonight. They end up going back to his place where the tension between them shifts and things quickly become intimate. Right in the middle of it, Nikki suddenly pulls away in a state of sheer panic and blames her extreme reaction on a sudden anxiety attack. The awkwardness completely ruins the night, and Bear spends the rest of the evening scouring the internet for any information he can find about the mysterious Wish Willow. The online forums are completely divided, with some people claiming the magic is entirely real, while others furiously insist it is nothing more than a cheap hoax. Bear wakes up the very next morning to find that Nikki is no longer sleeping in his bed. He walks into the kitchen and discovers a deeply disturbing sight. She is crouched down over the lifeless body of his dead cat, performing some bizarre and unsettling farewell ritual with the animal. Bear is entirely too stunned to ask what she is doing, and simply heads to work, where he pulls Ian aside to explain everything that just happened. Ian carefully listens to the crazy story and casually suggests that Nikki is probably just having a bad reaction to some type of drug, and advises Bear to get her to a doctor immediately. Later that evening, Bear feels a sharp sting of jealousy when he sadly watches Nikki leave the building with Ian instead of him. But later that night, there is a soft knock at his door, and he opens it to find Nikki standing there. She deeply apologizes for her strange behavior and blames it on something she ingested before confessing that she knows he likes her, and happily admits she has liked him for a while too. From that beautiful moment on, the two of them become an official couple and begin spending all their free time together. They share wonderful late nights and cozy movie dates, making Bear truly believe that his simple magical wish has given him the perfect life he always dreamed of. But the sweet illusion begins to violently crack one evening at dinner, when Bear politely asks her how her sick father is doing. Nikki completely dismisses the serious question, as if it does not matter at all. Just as Bear receives a sudden phone call from Ian, Ian drops a massive truth bomb by angrily revealing that Nikki lied about absolutely everything. Her dad is actually completely cancer-free and goes to work every single day without any health issues whatsoever. Ian also reveals that weeks before any of this magic started, Nikki explicitly told their mutual friend Sarah that she only ever viewed Bear as a younger brother. Bear hangs up the phone and returns to the dinner table in a state of absolute shock. Before he can even confront her, Nikki eagerly pulls out a precious family heirloom that belonged to her mother and happily gifts it to him. She passionately declares that she loves him more than anything else in the entire world. Bear slowly places the heirloom on the table and softly asks her if her dad truly had cancer. Nikki just stares at him blankly for a second, before bursting into uncontrollable laughter and repeating the word "no" over and over again. A dark and heavy realization washes over Bear as he sees the terrifying, magical obsession fully taking root in her broken mind. The situation rapidly deteriorates the very next morning when he finds her hiding in the dark corner of his bedroom, refusing to move an inch. She screams frantically that he does not love her nearly as much as she loves him. Things only get weirder when he wakes up on another day to discover that she has wildly chopped off his hair while he was sleeping. She even thickly tapes the front door shut from the inside to firmly trap him there with her. Bear barely manages to drag himself to work, where Sarah hands him a strange note that Nikki secretly slipped into his jacket. The terrifying note talks about the dead cat, and Bear violently throws up as he finally realizes Nikki was the one who purposefully poisoned his beloved pet. Desperate for a safe way out, Bear calls the phone number printed directly on the original Wish Willow packaging. The person on the other end confirms his absolute worst fears by explaining that the magical love is entirely artificial and physically impossible to reverse. As long as Bear draws breath, Nikki will firmly remain trapped in this extreme and horrifying state of violent obsession. The man on the phone briefly patches Nikki through to the line, and all Bear hears is her agonizing and endless screaming. He rushes back home to find her on the absolute brink of a total mental collapse. While she is in the shower, he confronts her through the locked door about murdering his cat, and then casually mentions that he plans to have a boys' night out with Ian. The bathroom falls dead silent before she suddenly lets out a blood-curdling shriek. So Bear reluctantly invites her to come along with him, just to keep the peace. At the crowded bar, Nikki absolutely refuses to leave his side for even a second, and laughs awkwardly loud at every minor joke he makes during a casual storytelling game with their friends. She violently tells a heavily twisted and terrifying version of Hansel and Gretel that completely ruins the mood and makes everyone deeply uncomfortable. Moments later, Bear pulls a game dare card instructing him to kiss the person sitting next to him, which happens to be Sarah. Nikki calmly kicks Sarah out of her chair and forcefully kisses Bear herself. Before standing up and loudly declaring that everyone in the room will eventually die, she arrogantly claims no one else will ever experience a connection as deep as theirs, and then grabs a broken glass bottle and viciously stabs herself while screaming loudly. Bear drags her out of the frozen room and takes her home, where he desperately tries to reason with whatever tiny shred of her real personality still remains. She just aggressively smiles, calling herself his freaky Nikki, and completely ignores his desperate pleas for personal space. He begs her to return to normal, but she just violently breaks down, repeating his words over and over until they lose all basic meaning. She uncontrollably wanders into the bedroom and casually destroys his belongings before rambling endlessly about letting go of her mind entirely. Bear later wakes up in the dark with an urgent text from Sarah demanding he come over immediately. As he sneaks out of the bed, Nikki slightly opens her eyes and actually speaks in her real voice, begging him to just kill her. So the obsessed magical version never wakes up again. Bear flees directly to Sarah, who reveals that Ian and Nikki had been having a secret affair, and suggests Nikki is just faking this entirely to deeply ruin Bear. Before they can even process this crazy information, Nikki breaks into the room and brutally murders Sarah in an instant. Completely calm and covered in blood, Nikki turns to Bear and coldly tells him this is all his fault, and strictly demands he help clean up the bloody mess. They sadly manage to hide the body together, and Bear drives home entirely alone in a state of utter shock. While blankly staring at Sarah's blood-soaked college acceptance letter resting on his passenger seat, he forcefully returns to the strange shop, begging for a simple solution. But the attendant strictly insists that undoing the magical curse is physically impossible. The only slim chance is if a totally different person uses a separate wish willow to specifically wish for her ultimate freedom. Bear grabs a brand new willow and attempts to snap it himself, but the magic strongly refuses to let him use it. He quickly drives over to Ian and breathlessly explains the entire horrific nightmare before aggressively handing him the magical wooden item. He begs his former friend to use this one remaining wish to quickly free Nikki from her torture, but Ian greedily decides to wish for $1 billion instead. Bear drops to the hard ground in total despair, and then sprints back to his apartment, where he discovers a grotesque bloody shrine built by Nikki right alongside Sarah's decaying body. Nikki aggressively begins screaming at him until Ian suddenly walks through the open front door and foolishly tries to calm her down without a single moment of hesitation. Nikki pulls out a loaded gun and shoots Ian dead right on the spot. Bear loudly screams that he loves her, which temporarily brings her back to her normal senses. He holds her tightly and promises to finally fix the terrible situation as she happily whispers that they will be together forever. She then deeply feels him faintly shake his head in utter defeat, and the monstrous obsession instantly takes over her ruined mind once again. Bear runs straight into the bathroom and firmly locks the door. Realizing that if he dies, the curse will finally be completely lifted, and Nikki will be truly free. He rips open his medicine cabinet and quickly swallows every single pill he can find, while Nikki softly repeats that everything is perfectly fine. From the other side of the wooden door, he briefly tries to throw the deadly pills back up, but then he distinctly hears the sharp sound of snapping wood from the hallway. He steps out to find Nikki smiling widely because she somehow found the very last wish willow and selfishly used it to wish that Bear would blindly love her with the exact same obsessive intensity. They quietly share one final peaceful moment together before the massive medical overdose finally catches up to his body, and he heavily collapses to the floor as the fading life fully leaves his body. Nikki eagerly prepares to end her own life, but the terrifying magic suddenly evaporates into the air. The dark curse completely releases its heavy grip, and she instantly returns to her normal self, only to terribly realize she is trapped in a house surrounded by corpses, with absolutely no way to ever undo the immense bloody tragedy. She violently breaks down, sobbing endlessly on the messy floor as the incredibly dark and deeply tragic story finally comes to an end.